All right, so we're going to be talking in the next section with statistics, we're going to be talking about things called margin of error. So when you do a survey, the population is often too big to survey every single member, so results are obtained by pulling a specific portion or a smaller group of individuals. Biases can occur in these studies due to the wording of the question that's being asked, or also due to the samples that are used. To be sure the sample is unbiased or random, the sample size of n, however many you're picking, it must have an equal chance of being picked. So studies often give a statistic that's called the margin of error. It gives a limit on the difference between how a sample responds and how the total population would respond. It helps estimate how close your results are to the truth about the population that's based on the sample itself. So there's a nice formula. Anytime you see the words margin of error referenced in a question, this is going to be the formula that you use. So n is the random sample size. That's what you're working with. And basically what you do is you do plus or minus 1 over radical n, whatever n is, times 100. And that should get you a percentage. Okay, so that should get you a percentage that you're working with. So now the question, though, it doesn't have to necessarily say what is the margin of error. You could be asked to maybe find what the actual sample size or what the population was that you were working with. So we're going to go over a couple questions here. The notes are not very long today. And then you guys will have some work to do tomorrow on this stuff. All right, so if we look at number 1, it says you need to decide whether to conduct a survey with a margin of error of plus or minus 2% or plus or minus 3%. So what sample size would you need to achieve each goal? So in this case, we have the margin of error. So what we have to do is we're going to find n. So that's what we're looking for. So we're going to find n, but we have to do 2 instances because it's plus or minus 2 or plus or minus 3, and what's our best bet? So if we talk about 2%, that means that when we talk about 2, we're going to set 2 equal to the equation that we have up here. It's positive 2% for right now. Yes, we can account for the negative, but you don't need to write the negative for right now. So it's 1 over radical n times 100. So we're going to start to isolate the n. So we're going to divide by 100 on both sides. So we get 2 over 100 equals 1 over radical n. It's a proportion, so we're going to cross multiply. So 2 radical n equals 100. We're going to then divide by 2. So radical n is 50. And then in order to get rid of a radical, you're going to square both sides. So you end up with 2,500. So that's the sample size. For plus or minus 3%, we're going to repeat the same process. We're going to divide by 100. That gets rid of those guys. Cross multiply. Divide by 3. You're going to end up with decimals, which is perfectly fine, but you get somewhere around 1,111. So depending on how big of a sample size you want, that will help you decide which percentage basically you're working with in terms of, do you want to really be asking 2,500 people or do you want to be asking 1,111 people for that? All right, next one. Using, again, same sort of notion here. So it says, suppose a finance director would like to reduce the cost by using a random sample of 100. So random sample, that is your n value. What is the margin of error? So this is using the formula. So margin of error on a sample size of this particular size. So margin of error, ME, is equal to plus or minus 1 over the square root. Technically it's n, but we have 100 in this case, times 100. So if you do 1 over the square root of 100 on your calculator times 100, you should be getting 10. And then just make sure that you're adding the plus or minus component and you're adding the percentage to it, because again, a margin of error is a percentage that you have to work with. All right, number 3, in a recent Gallup poll, 25% of people surveyed said they took a leave in the past week. The margin of error on the study was 4%. What does that mean? So basically, if that's your margin of error, 25% is going to be smack in the middle. So here's 25%. So if they're saying the margin of error is 4, that means you're going 4 this way and you're going 4 this way. So 4 taken away from 25 is 21. 4 added to 25 is 29. That is the range of values that you have for those people who took a leave. So then the question says, how many people were actually surveyed? Well, if they're saying that the margin of error is 4%, we're going to do what we did in number 1. So we're going to set the 4 equal to the equation for the margin of error. Then we're going to divide by 100. Then we're going to cross multiply. Then we're going to divide by 4. And then we're going to square both sides, and you end up with 625 people. So that means 625 people were polled for this particular survey. So for right now, all you are doing is taking the notes. Please ask me questions. It is one single formula, and it's whether you are determining, say, a range of values, whether you are actually calculating